All right, and welcome to the third episode of Further Inquiry. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Sakoda. She is the administrator of a Facebook group called Orthodox Christian Sexual Abuse, and also ran a website called Pokrov, which tracked abuse in both the Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches. She also works with Survivors Network for those abused by priests, or SNAP. Melanie, how are you today?
I am okay. I'm recovering from COVID, but I'm okay.
Well, sorry to hear about the COVID. I had it myself once. I know it's an unpleasant feeling, but let's jump right into it. For our audience, can you explain a bit of your background, like specifically what got you interested in tracking the problem of abuse in the Orthodox Church, and maybe also working with SNAP?
Well, when I was attending a Russian Orthodox cathedral in San Francisco in the early 90s, and I've been at the parish for about 12 years, and we had a incident at our church, and it involved a layman, and he was accused of abusing ultimately about 10 children, and the bishop handled it very poorly. And the children were really young, so it wasn't the children that came forward, it was the parents. And so we started thinking that, well, if it's not a priest and it's parents coming forward and it's, in real time, this is not a delayed disclosure, and it can't be handled, what must it be like for people who are survivors and who are coming forward, with delayed disclosure? So we started a website with the idea of reaching out to those people. And in, 2000, and we started the website in 1999. And in 2008, Barbara Blaine, who founded SNAP, reached out to us and to other groups that were working in the same area. SNAP was primarily a Catholic organization in the beginning, and invited us to a meeting in Chicago. And my coworker, Cappy Larson, went to the meeting, and we started working with SNAP. At that point in time, I began holding support meetings for local survivors in 2009. I joined the SNAP board in 2016, and then I took a staff position with SNAP in 2019.
Awesome. I know, like, she's probably hearing about like 10 children being abused by that. That's a horrific number, but even one's just horrific enough. But
well, that was pretty much all the children in the parish. I mean, Orthodox parishes are generally pretty small. I think it was all but maybe 2 children in the parish. So it was a small number in terms of the parish, but not an insignificant, or a small number in general terms, but not in a significant number in terms of the parish. Anyway, we digress.
All right, but like I'm getting in like into the main issue of it here, like mainly like starting with like maybe some questions about like abuse and like and cover up. Like, in your own like personal opinion, how pervasive would you say is sexual abuse within the Orthodox Church?
I don't really have an answer for that question. None of the Orthodox churches have published any. They don't have lists of their abusers. They haven't published any statistics. I will give the Catholic Church that. They have published statistics. I think they're sort of on the light side, but at least there's something as a base. There's 2 sort of schools of thought. One is that the Catholic Church has a bigger problem because its priests are celibate. The other side of the coin is that we know that in general abuse is perpetrated by men who are in relationships with adult women, fathers, stepfathers, boyfriends. So since Orthodox priests are married and are men who are in relationships with adult women, perhaps we have a bigger problem in the Orthodox Church. But at the current point in time, there's nothing to prove that one way or another.
Have there been any attempts, like maybe like to like gather some data on the abuse rates? Like,
No, there's been no attempt in the I mean, it would have to come from the churches. I mean, my website, while it was up, had a certain amount of information, but basically what I had was what was in the public domain, news articles, statements maybe from churches or lawsuits, criminal prosecutions, and that wasn't enough to form a statistically significant
I guess
study.
just yeah. I was going to say, like, I remember like seeing somewhere online, if I recall correctly, I think the Orthodox Church in America, the OCA, I think they once, I guess, did a study on like on rates of abuse within their own jurisdiction, but I guess from my understanding, they never published the findings to the
I was going to
public.
say, I've never seen anything about that. They may have done it. I know they had a lawsuit in, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly when, maybe 2008, and they made some significant changes in that year as a result of this lawsuit as a part of the settlement. Unfortunately, I think that from what I understand from cases that I know have gone to the OCA more recently, I don't think that the changes made any significant dent in the way abuse cases were normally handled.
Now, obviously, clerical abuse is probably, I would assume, maybe like here in the West, like it's probably think of mainly as more of a Catholic problem. Do Orthodox laity and clergy like believe, like at least maybe some have a tendency to believe that clerical abuse and cover up is not so much a problem occurring within their own community?
Oh, definitely. They think that because they have married clergy, men with wives and children, that they're not going to have the same problem as the Catholic Church. And as I said, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I do know that married priests abuse. We have celibate clergy, both priests and bishops. And abuse has been known in both those categories, both married priests and priests that are supposedly celibate.
Now this is like a question like I asked like a previous guest before, like concerning the Catholic issue. Like, in your opinion, why do the hierarchy engage in cover up? I mean, what makes it just so difficult to just do the right thing by calling the police?
I think it's, in some ways, it's a human problem. When you have groups of people, it's really hard to believe that a man you went to seminary with, that you may be friends with, that he would commit these kind of crimes. Now, unfortunately, what we know from studies is that false allegations of sex abuse, and particularly false allegations of child sex abuse, whether they're in real time or whether they're delayed, are very seldom false. So that and I don't know why we can't convince the bishops that when you have one of these accusations, you need to take it seriously. You need to do outreach. You need to see if you can find out. You don't just sit on your thumbs and wait for people to come to you. You go to all the parishes where this person worked and you say, we've had an accusation. You don't have to be real specific about it. Maybe you could say he's been accused by, one person that he abused them when they were, a child, a teen. This person is male, female, give some basic information, and then say, if you have any information about this, here's the number of the, if there's a police investigation, here's the number of the police that are investigating. Here's if it's an internal investigation, that nothing's been reported to the law enforcement, although the churches should be reporting to law enforcement when they get these accusations. And in many states in the US, they are in fact required to report. They are mandatory reporters. But in any event, if it's something that's being handled within the church, then who to report to in the church, so that when you have internal investigations, which probably should be handled by outside firms, not by people that may know these people. But then when you have an investigation, you have more data to deal with. If you have one accusation by one person, in general, in those cases, the allegation is considered unfounded or not credible or unsupported, whatever language they occur to leave. If you have 4 accusations against the same clergy, then I think you're looking at a case where this is likely something that happened. But in the past, they simply haven't. They have taken the side of the priest. One Catholic whistleblower that I know of, he says he likens it to the idea that they've forgotten. They think of the church as being the clergy, the building, the assets, the icons, the chalices, and everything. And it's not. What the church is the community of believers, and that's what they should be protecting, and that's what they're not protecting.
Absolutely. Externals are really irrelevant. It's what the people that matter. Now, to your knowledge, has abuse cover-up even been committed by the Orthodox patriarchs themselves?
It's a little harder to talk about the patriarchs. I would say, just as an informed opinion, I would say yes. But because I'm sadly, English is my only language. I've studied others, but English is the only language that I'm fluent in. I don't know as much about abuse, say, in Greece or Russia or any of the other Slavic countries or in Turkey. But I would suspect, from what's going on in this country, I know that, for example, when there was a priest accused in this country and it went, back to the mother church in Europe, oftentimes they don't deal with it. They have removed some priests. The Greeks removed Father Koveos. I can't think of his first name at the moment. Sorry. And others have been removed, but a lot of times it gets thrown back to they're either not going to remove him, or in one case they removed him from ministry, didn't defrock him, and so when that particular priest died, his victim, who thought she was okay with this, became very upset because there was this lavish clergy funeral, and everyone was singing his praises, and everyone forgot about her.
That's truly shameful. But hopefully she's able to heal. Now, in your experience, who would probably be some examples of Orthodox bishops that you are aware of, who have engaged in cover up?
Cover up. I know that off the top of my head, I know that Metropolitan Jonah Paffhausen in the OCA was removed for covering up abuse. And suppose also in the OCA, Archbishop Seraphim Storheim was removed for abuse. And there's some indication that he covered up for other abusers, probably because he was himself an abuser.
Have there been more aside from that? Have there been many other cases of bishops themselves actually being abusers?
I believe I know there have been some in Europe, I think in the Greek church, and I can't remember now whether that's a Serbian or Bulgarian, or maybe it's both of them. There have been bishops in those three countries I know that have been removed for abuse. I mean, it's very easy, I think, for an abuser to move up through the ranks. And sometimes, I remember someone telling me very early on that, well, yeah, they took him out of parish work because that way he wouldn't be interacting as much with children. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because then he'll be deciding cases where abusers are being brought to his attention. And what's he going to do then? Chances are he's going to protect the abusers. But I think it's a problem. The Catholic and the Orthodox churches shared 1,000 years of history, and the attitudes toward these cases started before the split, so that there is a nexus where both churches react in much the same ways. That is, they tend to protect the priest, denigrate the person who's coming forward, and unless there's the thing that I think has really made a difference is public exposure. I know in the Greek Orthodox Church, you had the case of Father Nicholas Katinas. He was down in Dallas. He had been there for many years. He had been transferred there from Chicago, where there were complaints about him abusing there, and then he was transferred to Dallas. And when the case came forward, he was sued, or he and the church was sued for abuse, and ultimately 6 men came forward to accuse him of abuse, some from his Chicago days and some from his parish in Dallas, including one person who was not a parishioner but was a friend of the priest's son, and he was abused. They were supposed to go out trick-or-treating. He was at the priest's house, and he was abused by the priest then. So it's, you have to wonder if Father Katinas had been removed when the abuse allegations, or at least investigated, they had brought the criminal charges, they had reported to the police, I think 5 of those 6 victims would not have been hurt. And I think that's on the church.
Absolutely. So, like, based on that particular priest, like, did he commit abuse? Like, when the survivors, the victims, were they like still children at the time, or were they adult males?
They were. These were all children. I mean, some of them may have been early teens, but they were under the age of majority.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, like, in this case, maybe that priest like was he attracted to prepubescent or like post-pubescent kids? Now, what would you say are probably some, like, aside from that particular priest, like, what would you say are probably some of the worst cases of abuse and cover-up that you've probably heard about?
I think one of the worst was actually, coincidentally, it's also out of Texas, was the I think it was a Roker monastery in Texas, Blanco, Texas, and there was abuse allegations that first came forward, I think, in 2006, or maybe it was earlier than that. And the second round of, anyways, 2 priests were at the monastery, the abbot and another priest, were accused of abusing 1 minor. They were both convicted. So the first priest, had a child, had a trial. The abbot, after the first priest was convicted, took a guilty plea. And you still had people saying, oh, the fathers couldn't have done that. It's the godless American legal system that doesn't understand monasticism. Anyway, I think a number of years later, in 2006, they had 5 of monastics were accused of abuse. The abbot, who had been accused earlier, and then 4 additional men. And he made the Father Benedict, Benedict Green may not have been the abbot at that point in time, but he was still at the monastery. And ultimately, all of them were convicted. I'm not sure if Sam Green was, Benedict Green was convicted, or if he committed. I know he committed suicide. I don't remember now whether he committed suicide before or after he was convicted. And the monastery just basically folded. That was the end of it. They had since, when the first allegations came down, Roker released them, but they continued sort of operating on their own. Which is much easier. It's a little difficult to say you're a Catholic priest if you're not part of the Roman Church or one of the Eastern Orthodox rites. It's very easy to say you're an Orthodox priest and not be attached to any of the canonical jurisdictions. We had the same case with the so-called Archdiocese of Vasilopoulos in New York, where the head of the Metropolitan, his name was Pangradios. He had in fact been a Greek Orthodox priest. He was convicted of child sex abuse in Pennsylvania, and then went on to form his own jurisdiction. And no one spoke out against it. None of the Greek bishops called them on the fact. They must have known that he had been convicted. They didn't say anything about it. And I don't understand, I suppose they didn't want to get themselves into sort of a legal issue. But if he was convicted, I mean, my friends and I, we found the paperwork showing his conviction. And he had abused more than one minor. And after his case was publicized on our website and some media picked it up, they had new victims come forward.
Oh, wow.
So, and he had been, I can't remember now how long, I think he had been operating as an independent Orthodox jurisdiction, for maybe 20 years. So, we don't do a very good job. One of the other things that we had suggested was that, there is, used to be SCOBA, now it's called the Council of Canonical Bishops, Assembly of Canonical Bishops, I guess, in the United States, that they become more proactive in telling people, okay, these people are fringe, they are not with the GOA or the OCA or the Antiochian Archdiocese or any of the other groups, and and at least warning people that way, because I think while you find abusers in mainstream canonical churches, you are more likely to find them in the U.S. You're more likely to find them in these little independent Orthodox groups, splinter groups, because what do you do? It's just like Pangradios. He was removed from the Greek priesthood, so he formed his own jurisdiction. It's not impossible to do that in this country. It may be harder to do in Europe, although I think even in Europe there's the old calendar groups and the new calendar groups, and as I said, it's hard because I don't speak any language other than English. It's harder to follow abuse back in Europe, but I'm sure that the same is true of those groups, that you're likely to, the main Orthodox churches that are under they're connected to the ecumenical patriarch. You're going to find abusers there, but I think you're more likely to find it in the splinter groups. And there's it's not scientific. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your opinion, which Orthodox jurisdiction probably has like the poorest record in terms of like handling abuse cases?
I don't think any of them are particularly good. I think some of the three biggest groups in the U.S., the canonical groups anyways, the GOA, the OCA, and the Antiochians, did develop sex abuse policies, so that they supposedly had some sort of a background. So the Serbian church, the Bulgarians that aren't part of the OCA, they I think maybe I guess the Bulgarians I think have a sex abuse policy too. I think Metropolitan Joseph developed one, but I think you're likely to find in the groups that are have not been as much in the public eye. You've had publication of Greek cases, you've had publication of Russian cases, you've had publication of Antiochian cases. Some of the others have slid under the radar, and that's one of the problems with focusing attention on these issues, because for a lot of the media, if they don't realize that although Orthodoxy is divided jurisdictionally, it is the third major Christian faith in the United States. If you put everyone together, if the OCA ever realizes dream of becoming the Orthodox Church of America, they would all be under one roof, under one jurisdiction, but they're not. They're all divided. They're divided by language, culture. They're divided by calendar, and people look at it as just too little. The Katinas, Nicholas Katinas case and the Blanco Monastery case did make some splash in the press. There was the priest in New York who was caught on video with his mistress. That made of course a splash in the media. But by and large, it's hard to get media attention to the Orthodox cases.
Now, you mentioned that 1,000 years shared history. I've been told by a Catholic psychotherapist that there are canons like dealing with sexual abuse going back as far as the 4th century. What would you say is probably the oldest case of abuse that you've heard about? Meaning, like, what year did it occur? Like maybe like the early 20th century, 19th century, or something like that?
Yeah, I think the earliest case that we heard about, as far as I remember, was like maybe from the 1800s, early 1900s. And there was some, I found a news article about it, so it made some impact in the media of the day. But of course, it would have been confined. One of the things that, while the internet is kind of a blessing and a curse, one of the things that it means is that you can't have a priest who abused in California and transfer him to New York and think that people aren't going to find out about it. Now, that used to be possible, because you would have to, criminal cases are going to be, you have to go to the county where the criminal conviction took place to look up the conviction. But if it's in the media now, you Google the name and, it might pop up, which is one of the tricks, of course, that some of them do, is they change the spelling of their name. That is one drawback of the internet. You'll find people Americanizing their name, or just so it won't show up in a Google search. But in general, it's a lot harder for people to get away with that now. And when we had our website, we would always include all the different names that the clergy went by. So it would pull up no matter what name the people were trying to Google. Of course, I'm sure some of them kept ahead of us. But as I said, in these days of the internet and social media, it's a lot harder for people who have been publicly accused of abuse to be transferred someplace, to be quietly transferred someplace else. Now they still do it, but it's harder, particularly, as I said, if there has been some kind of public exposure in the media.
Where was I? Now going on over to survivors. Actually, no. Now I remember what I was going to ask. Like, have you had like elderly survivors like maybe come to you, like saying like that they were maybe abused, like maybe say back in like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, or something like that?
I can't remember that specifically. Orthodox survivors that were that old, or I did have, when we first put our website up, I had someone write to me, and their daughter had been abused in an Orthodox church. It was someplace in the Midwest, and he said, I guess his daughter's case was not handled very well, and this was an older case. That was in the early 90s, and I think his daughter was abused in the 50s or the 60s. And he said they didn't handle it well, and he told me not, at that time we were still trying to get attention to the case, the San Francisco case that spurred us to form our website. And he says it was an OCA cathedral, and he said, don't expect anything from the OCA. And he was right. No.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, other than, I will have to say, someone reminded me of this the other day that I was talking to. One of the first Orthodox sex abuse policies came out of that incident at the church in San Francisco. That was the OCA's first sex abuse policy. It was formed in the early 90s. They've since had upgrades, as I said, after the one lawsuit they faced. They did a significant upgrade, and on paper, their policy is not bad. There's still, as in most of the church's policies, there's a lot of discretion for the bishop, which means that even if, say, who's ever investigating on behalf of the church comes back with, yeah, we think this happened, the bishop can still override them. And I think that's something that people in the pews should be looking at. You don't want that. And I know some people give the old saw, well, innocent till proven guilty, and they're talking about, a criminal conviction. Well, the fact of the matter is, criminal cases, number one, are subject to statute of limitations. And a lot of times when people come forward, they're already past the statute. They can't have a criminal prosecution. And secondly, that churches don't need a criminal conviction in order to remove a priest. The churches have absolute control over who represents them in ministry. So if they have reason to believe that someone is an abuser, they are perfectly within their rights removing them, whether or not there's been a criminal conviction. And, if you can get the case out in the public, they sometimes do that. Nicholas Katinas was removed without a criminal conviction. But, you have to get the story out to the public, or they're just, and I tell people they don't always listen to me, and that's okay. I didn't follow my own advice when we were talking about what had happened at the church in San Francisco. We went to the church first. But You can, if what has happened is a crime, go to the law enforcement first. And then if you want to, go to the church. But make sure that you try to get it outside of the ecclesiastical channels. You want it to be, either go to law enforcement if you can. And if you can't do that, file a lawsuit if you can. And, reporting directly to the church should be your last option, and only if it's the only thing that you can do. And if there's some way you can get the media interested in your story, like if there's a big enough group of survivors of the same clergy, then do that first. Reporting to the church, in my view, should always be the last resort, because chances are they're not going to do anything. And you're going to be disappointed and hurt.
Now, moving on to a question specifically about survivors. Have survivors described to you how the abuse they endured affects their own daily lives? Do they for example, have difficulty with relationships?
I work with a lot of survivors now. I hold, I think, 5 support groups a month. 1 for Orthodox survivors. And yes, that's all true. Survivors, particularly those who are abused as children, but adult survivors as well, are prone to substance abuse. They're prone to a lot of autoimmune problems because they're of the fight or flight response that gets triggered. It's kind of always on. And there are a lot of relationship problems are another thing, because one of the side effects of clergy abuse is you don't know who to trust. This was a man you were told was trustworthy, that you may have trusted, you may have loved, and they betrayed your trust. So who do you trust? It's really hard to get around that. And one snack later describes working with survivors like trying to herd wounded cats, because you do get a lot of that reaction. They don't necessarily trust you when you're holding these support groups. It takes a while for that trust to develop, and in some people it never fully develops. It has lifelong repercussions, and that are very difficult to they're difficult to treat. And you have to find someone who's trauma informed, who knows what trauma survivors need to heal. And you have to get to the point where you either, some survivors don't remember particularly child survivors don't remember their abuse. So you have to get to the point where you remember it, or alternatively, sometimes people won't always know their abuse, but won't understand that the relationship problems, the physical problems, the problems with holding jobs, again, the lack of trust, the distrust of authority, has impacted their lives. And once you get to that, then that's the point where you can start healing. And the first thing is telling someone, maybe a trusted friend, maybe a relative, maybe a group like SNAP. But the idea is that the first step on the road to healing is acknowledging that you were abused and being able to tell someone about it. Now, you do have to be careful, because not everyone is a safe person to talk to about this. People will say unhelpful things like, oh, you were abused 40 years ago. Get over it. And this isn't something that you get over. And for survivors, it's not something that's in the past. It's something that affects their day-to-day life. So, if you know a survivor, if you've been told by someone that they were abused, number 1, believe them. Number 2, ask them if there's anything that you can do to help them. But just believing them is a big step. in their healing process, because they'll begin, oh, this person believed me. And that's why support groups are really helpful, because people sometimes think they're the only ones. Unless they know of other survivors, but they may think, what did I do that made Father do that to me? And it's a way for a child to assert control. What did I do? So what can I do in the future so as not to be abused? Unfortunately, some of the things that children develop in response do not become particularly helpful when they become adults. So that's why you need to have people acknowledge what happened to them themselves, and you need to have them getting professional help. And some people say that actually talking to their peers, peer-to-peer support groups, are even more helpful than therapy. Depends on where you are, I guess, in the healing process, and what kind of damages you have. But certainly, sometimes people need medication, anti-anxiety medication, maybe sometimes abuse triggers more serious psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar, and those may need medication. So, you need to know what you need, and you need to figure it out, and you need to have the courage to do it, and that's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that Catholic psychotherapist I mentioned. Like when I interviewed him, he quoted another expert in this field. Like he described like child sexual abuse as quote unquote soul murder, which I think is a very correct term to use in this particular case, because it's quite literally damaging the essence of who they are, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, all sex abuse is damaging. But when you have it by someone, and particularly, I think in the Catholic churches and the sacramental churches, where the priest, in some aspects during the liturgy, represents God, then it also affects your spiritual life, which I think is why people refer to it as soul murder. And the truth of the matter is, and maybe this is another question you had, but most survivors sever their relationships with the church where they were abused. A very small handful are able to maintain it. Some go on to other religions, either radically different or, and I don't mean just Protestant, but, like maybe they become Buddhists, or they become Muslim, yeah. But very, very few of them are the vast majority eschew any kind of organized religion. They just don't trust it anymore.
And in this context, you're referring specifically like to the Orthodox survivors you've worked with?
It's true for the Catholic survivors as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, you since you already mentioned, like, if essentially, I was gonna ask if survivors tend to leave the church. Like, for those who have left, I guess from what you described, it sounds like they experience a crisis of faith. Do some also like turn like to some form of like air religion, meaning like atheism or agnosticism as well?
Oh, I think probably the majority of survivors, as I said, lose all kind of faith. They may sort of have a spirituality, particularly those who have substance abuse problems, and may go to AA or NA, and the idea of the higher power. So they may have some sort of a spiritual concept, but you're not going to find these people in religions. I mean, some of them, it becomes difficult even to go to family functions, weddings, funerals. I've heard Orthodox people tell me, that their family was mad at them because they went to go to their grandmother's funeral, but when they stepped inside the church, it was all too triggering for them, so they had to leave, and the family was really mad. And I think, I think that's what you're going to find. It just becomes too hard. especially because if it happened in the church, because the icons, the incense, particularly smells, can be very triggering for survivors. And they're usually one of the things that's, if people don't remember their abuse, a smell is one of the things that's likely to bring it back. Either if it's the incense or if it's the aftershave that their abuser wore. These memories can be triggering. So people avoid, you don't want to feel like that. And so you avoid it. And in the case of the Orthodox churches, because it's really like, the Greek church, most of the people who go to the Greek church are Greek. So you're cut off from your community as well, which is sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the matching, hatching, and dispatching.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, like, where is it? Like, do survivors tend to be ostracized from the communities that they grew up in? Because I would assume that maybe Orthodox communities are probably tight knit. Like, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and they're smaller. You don't have in the maybe some of the Greek and I think Antiochian parishes can be pretty big, but in my experience, most of the Russian parishes are fairly small. And that's one of the other problems with trying to come forward, because if you're in a Catholic church where they have 5 masses every weekend and 200 people at each mass, if you come forward, it may not be obvious. If you come forward in an Orthodox church, chances are people in the parish are going to know who you are. And one of the things that happens is, I personally think it's kind of a self-protective device, that people think that you must be lying, because if you're not lying, then it could happen to their children. It could happen to their grandchildren. And people don't like to think about that. They want to trust their clergy, which is one of the reasons why predators are attracted to churches. They know people have their guard down. They know if they're in a position of authority, they have that built-in trust. And it's going to be really hard to move that dial from, he's a priest. He had hands laid on him, so he's been, the Catholics actually have a word for, that there's been a change, but it doesn't change. If you're an abuser before you become ordained, you're going to be an abuser after you're ordained. The church may be mystical. It's not magic. It can't change people like that. And that's why, there should be more emphasis placed on who they are ordaining. And in that case, the Orthodox are lucky because they allow married priests, you have a bigger pool of men to pick from. But you have to be careful. If someone showed some signs of, inappropriate behavior in the seminary, then he shouldn't be ordained. And if you don't find out about it until he's already been in a parish, you need to act swiftly and surely to get him out of ministry so that other people aren't hurt. If you care about people coming to the church, all these survivors that are lost, are they not worthy of care? I mean, you can, I personally, I don't know. I've never understood it, and I don't think I ever will. I don't see why you wouldn't protect your faithful, and particularly the most vulnerable among your faithful, the children.
Yeah, I was going to ask, it's been reported to me but it's been reported to me in the Catholic Church, some survivors, if not maybe most, are simply given a check without any offer of additional help. Has the same, or has maybe something similar occurred within the Orthodox Church, where maybe the allegations were credible, but the bishop or whoever the case may be, like just like, gave him a check and said, all right, get out of my office?
As I said, what happens in the Orthodox churches is more secretive than I think what's happened in the Catholic Church has been such a spotlight put on about it, and particularly, if you look at the Boston Globe expose in 2002, they put a lot of emphasis on that people were given checks, that they were, made to sign non-disclosure agreements so that they never talked about what happened. And you don't have as much information about that. As I said, to the media, the Orthodox are a bunch of little ethnic churches. They don't think of them as, basically, and I get a lot of questions about this sometimes. If you're Russian Orthodox, you can go into a Greek Orthodox church, and it's going to be different music, and I know the Greeks tend to like their organs too, but basically it's the same liturgy. You can follow along. You know what's happening, and if you get permission from the priest, you have cross communion. So it really is, it is the third major Christian faith in the U.S. And that's not widely recognized. I actually was working on a media release, and I wanted the I wanted to say that, because I think that's something, if we want to put more focus on the Orthodox churches in order to address this problem of clerical sex abuse, you need to get the cases out in the public eye. That's the only thing that really makes the bishops
held accountable.
move. Yeah, makes them move.
Now,
they don't like it when they're in the press.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your experience, do survivors tend to be mostly male or female, or is it maybe evenly distributed?
I think if according to like SNAP's membership, it may be a little more slanted toward male survivors, but part of that if you think about it, is male priests generally have more access to male victims. They're altar boys. The priest can say, if there's families in the church with single mothers, oh, how about if I take the boys on a camping trip? No one's going to think too much about it. And one of the reasons why, as I said, it's not entirely clear to me which way, whether there'll be more abuse or less abuse in the Orthodox Church, is if you have a priest that has children, and maybe he has girl children, he can say, oh, why doesn't, Sarah come over to play with Emily? So in the Orthodox churches, you may have more of an even thing, but there's nothing statistical to back that up. And I think the vast majority of victims, and this is something when we put up our website, we weren't really expecting, there are a lot of adult women who are victimized by clergy. Adult men too, but particularly adult women. And their testimony is generally discounted. Oh, what did you do to make Father do that?
So victim blaming.
Yeah, and I mean, with men, it's a little more difficult because the Orthodox Church, like the Catholic Church, doesn't view homosexuality as an option. So if a priest is preying on another man or on a boy, that becomes more something that may produce a bigger response. If the priest is preying on a woman, or even sometimes teenage girls, it's like, oh, they came on to Father, and poor man, he just couldn't resist. He's only a man after all. Um,
Mm.
and I think it's a shame. I think that, and I do know that when SCOBA put out a sex abuse policy a number of years ago, one of the things that it said in there, and it said it very well, was that in terms of the parishioners, there, the priest he's the father. So no one is truly able to, if the priest does something, people tend to be in shock. I remember one man who was abused in a seminary saying that when the priest that abused him started, he was so shocked he couldn't move. And I think, that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind. There's fight and flight, but there's also freeze. And a lot of survivors in religious situations, that's what they do if their priest assaults them. Particularly if it's an assault kind of out of the blue. Sometimes with grooming, a different dynamic comes in where, father showed me porn, and then he puts his hand on my thigh, and then he does something else, and the victim starts to feel complicit, and particularly if they really cared for the priest. And a lot of the priests target people from broken families, particularly where there's just the mother has charge with the kids. So, and they want that, male influence on their children. But they can, and they can feel if they're groomed by the priest, and in fact, the priest grooms the whole family, the parent as well as the children, to accept things that they shouldn't be accepting. And it's very, very, very difficult for survivors who felt that they loved their abuser, whether they're male or female.
Now, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if someone just plain out assaults you, there's not the same relationship built up. If you're groomed, you've gotten something out of this relationship. He took you for ice cream, he took you to the movies, he listened to your problems, something that you weren't maybe getting at home. Then it's, once the assaults begin, it's a little difficult to extract yourself and to extract your mind from the relationship that you loved this man.
Now, when the abuse, for survivors, when the abuse occurred, do they usually report to you, like, or to law enforcement, if they were prepubescent or post-pubescent at the time? Because in the Catholic Church, like, from my own understanding, like, most survivors tend to have been post-pubescent males. Like, I'm wondering, what is it a bit different, or is it similar in the Orthodox Church?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's hard to say, because even in the Catholic Church, SNAP has always suspected that the women survivor, women who were abused as either teens or children are undercounted. And in the SNAP database, the male and female survivors are pretty evenly distributed. And as I said, the difference may account for the fact that the priests are male, and if your priest wants to take your son on an outing or have him come, go on a camping trip, you might not think too much of it. If he wants to take your daughter on a camping trip, yeah, not as likely, as I said. Although in Orthodox cases, you may have more of that because the priest may have daughters of his own. But I've totally lost track of what you asked me. Sorry, I still have a little bit of COVID brain.
I was asking, like, I guess for survivors that you've personally worked with, like, were they prepubescent or post-pubescent at the time that they were abused?
I think probably more of them were post-pubescent, but some of them were on the cusp. I think 11 years old, at least in the Catholic studies, 11 years old tends to be, the age, so that they're sort of on the cusps. Some 11-year-olds look like men, some 11-year-olds look like kids. So it's really difficult to say. And I think as a child gets older, they are more likely to be involved as altar boys or in other activities that bring them in closer proximity to the priest. And plus, I suppose people who are well, I guess, let me backtrack a little bit. A lot of people think that this is about sexual attraction, but abuse is not about sex, it's about power and control. And I think why you tend to find more boys and more adolescents abused in the Catholic Church is because the priest had more access to those people. And it could have been anyone. I know one of my friends was abused by a Catholic priest. She's a woman. She was abused by a Catholic priest. Most of his victims were males. She is one of two of the whole group of victims. She is only one of two girls that were abused by the same priest. So, if you look at him, he's most likely going to be, accused as abusing. And I think most of his victims were, that 11, 12, 13 kind of range. But that wasn't all that he did, because it's not about who he wants to have sex with. It's about exercising that power and control over another human being. And she just happened. He was, he, I guess, groomed her family. He came to their house. He abused her in her own house. And in the church too, I believe. But, I don't think, and one of the reasons that they sometimes put priests who abuse adolescents back into ministry is because they can basically teach this person to check birth certificates. But is there that much difference between abusing, say, a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old? 18-year-old may be legal in some states.
But abuse is still abuse.
It's still abuse, but it may not be something that's actionable, which is all which is what the church more cares about, because if it's not something that's criminal, if the person is groomed, so it's not just an out-and-out sexual assault, most law enforcement isn't going to do anything about it unless there are laws on the books, and there are in some states, that say any sex between a clergy and a parishioner is a crime. California has just this year introduced a bill to make that a crime in California. And that there are 13 states that have laws that 13 states, and I think the District of Columbia, that currently have laws on the books like that. But if you're not in one of those states and you're groomed, and then the priest has sex with you when you're 18, that's not going to be considered a crime. Now the church should still pay attention to it, because what's to say that the priest doesn't get sloppy and start assaulting minors again? And there are, I remember one, and this is a Greek Orthodox case, I'm kind of remembering, where the priest, they knew he was abusing adult women. And they just kept keeping him in ministry, passing him along, because of course it was this woman, the women's fault, and he finally assaulted a 12-year-old girl. And that's when he, Her parents found out. Her parents reported to the police. He was convicted. He was ultimately defrocked. But that's a little bit rarer. But it does mean that, you know, if someone's abusing teens or adults, you should pay attention, because, as I said, this is not about sex. This is about availability. And if a younger person, a person of a different sex, comes across their paths and they think they can get away with it, they will abuse that person too.
Now, have you personally had any contact with survivors outside North America? Like, and if so, like, you know, where are these like survivors typically located? Like, I personally have I contacted a former Serbian Orthodox deacon. Perhaps you've heard of him, Bojan Jovanovic.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like, have you like has spoken with any survivors outside the U.S.?
Well, as I said, one of the problems is I only speak English. So if they speak English and they contact me, I've heard from them. I do know. I'm trying to think. I'm not remembering any contact with survivors from Europe, other than maybe some Greek people I know from Greece, and there maybe have been some Russians too, but it's limited because of my language limitations. And while most people in other countries are better about having children learn a second language than we are in the U.S., that's a limit, can be a limitation for other people too, that they, you know, they can't talk to me because I only speak English, and you know, I can't talk to them because I don't speak any I don't speak Greek, I don't speak any of the Slavic languages, so it's difficult. But if they found our website, people contact us. But it has been just as the same is true with SNAP. Most of it was abuse within the U.S.
Mm. Now, how often do survivors like maybe come to you and report that they were abused by a cleric? Like, do you like get this like every week, every month, something like that?
Well, I've had um, I think I've had like 2 Orthodox cases come up in the last year. You know, as I said, and because I don't have my website anymore, I probably, you know, don't hear from Orthodox survivors, other than perhaps who heard of me before the website went down, or but most of them are coming to SNAP, you know, because we do actually, I take that back. We had 3 cases this year, all adults, 2 in the Greek church and 1 in the OCA. So you know, it's steady. It's not, you know, I hear more often from Catholic survivors, or, you know, actually, you know, or from various Protestant denominations. But the Orthodox are there. As I said, some of them I think don't come forward because they think no one's going to believe them, because Orthodox priests are married, ergo there isn't a problem in the Orthodox churches. Now, if they've been paying attention, they could see the big expose. I think it was a Houston Chronicle did on the Southern Baptist Convention, and there again you have married clergy, and you have abuse. You know, it doesn't protect. And truthfully, I think most parishioners will be better off when they take their children to church, having the same eye on them that they would at a public playground. Just because someone is in church doesn't mean he's there like you are to worship God. He may be there because churches are prime hunting grounds for predators.
Now, when a survivor reports abuse, or rather, the survivors that you've worked with, have they like said to you, like, they were maybe like, were they bullied or were they harassed by other clergy, by the parishioners, by the bishops, etc.?
Well, I think one of the best examples, and it's actually out there in the media, was in the Katina's case. The first two survivors to come forward, one was a Ukrainian boy. Well, he was a man at the time he came forward, but he was Ukrainian, and he had been attending the church in Dallas where he was abused, and one of the men from Chicago. And when they first came forward, one of the Greek women in the parish said, he's not Greek, he's probably lying. And with the idea that his ethnicity mattered, as opposed to him being a child, and an Orthodox child attending a parish. And the kind of the beneficial side effect of that happening was that people who were also abused got angry and started coming forward. The child that I mentioned that was abused because he was going trick-or-treating with the priest's son, he read that. He was totally angry, and he was like the next person to come forward. So it's, I think you have to, it's harder to come forward in Orthodox communities because it's more likely they're going to figure out who you are. And it's more likely that people are going to find some way to discount what you're saying. Either it's, sometimes people will say, well, that child has a drinking problem or a drug problem. And it's like, well, yeah, but that could also be a symptom of abuse, not a reason that they're making this up. And, you find people saying really hurtful things. And if you're the first person to come forward, it can be really hard. Once the first person has come forward, the second, third, fourth, fifth person, they have a much easier time because there's other accusations out there. And as I said, people don't think about the fact that false allegations are extremely rare. But once there's more than one allegation, they start thinking about, especially if they're from different times and, they don't know each other, different periods of the priest's history, maybe different parishes, you start to wonder, or you should start to wonder. But anyways, people don't always. I was at a SNAP media event a few months ago, and this woman stopped her car and starts shaking her finger at her. You don't accuse priests. And it's like, we didn't respond to her. What can you say to someone that's that convinced? But the fact of the matter is, even if they're accused, even if that that's what they did, it doesn't make that reliance on the infallibility of the clergy, that, basically they're next to God, has never really made a whole lot of sense to me. But it's certainly, after all these years of doing what I do, it doesn't make any sense to me now. Priests do abuse. And as a matter of fact, as I said before, studies have shown that predators like churches because people trust you. People think you're there for the same reason that they are. And it gives you an advantage.
Now, going back to the issue of abusers, what would you say probably, causes these men to commit their abuse? Like, do they have maybe trouble backgrounds? Do they have mental health issues?
And this is, I don't think this is anything scientific. I think that basically what you're looking at is sociopaths, people who have no conscience, people who are missing something in their background that doesn't allow them to empathize with other people. And they just want what they want. You know, they like the idea of power and control. And so they take it and they subject other people to it. And, you know, it's good for them. So it doesn't matter if it's not good for them. They may not even notice that it's not good for them. Do some of them, you know, supposedly, particularly when they're on trial for, you know, criminal charges, they'll talk about, oh, I was abused when I was a kid too. But I don't know if there's a correlation between abuse and abuser. I know that a lot of survivors, that's something that they worry about. That's one of the things of why they don't tell people. But the fact of the matter is that most survivors do not become abusers. So there's something in the person that does become an abuser, if they were abused. There's something missing in them. Now, children do sometimes, if they're abused, do sometimes do reenactments. They, you know, use their toys, or they, you know, do things to as a way of trying to understand it. And sometimes, you know, they may abuse other children. But I think what you find is that those people who are going to go on to become abusers, that this isn't just a way of trying to wrap their heads around what happened to them. They enjoy it. It gives them a feeling of power and control. Most of the other people who are just going to say, oh, I didn't like that. It made me feel really bad. I felt really bad about what I had done. And they, you know, they don't do it again. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, you want to get children, you want to find out that children were abused. You want to get them into treatment so that, you know, they understand better, so they don't hurt other children inadvertently in trying to figure out what's going on with them. But the more important point is that most people who are abused do not grow up to become abusers. Quite the opposite.
Now, the Orthodox Church obviously allows for married men to become priests. And you're like anecdotally, I guess, like from what you have seen or for what survivors have reported to you, were the abusers like usually married? Were they celibate, or were like there cases of like both types like committing abuse against the survivors you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, it's both types. Sometimes, you know, some of the married men use their wife and child, if you will, as a beard, as a disguise. And I don't know how many clergy wives I've of abusers that I've heard from. So you have, the one thing you do have in the Orthodox Church that you don't have in the Catholic Church is you don't have wives and children as being victimized by the priests. You do have that in Orthodoxy. You know, you have priests abusing their own children, priests abusing other children, and then you have I don't know. I would almost say that it's probably evenly divided between priests, that married priests, and celibate priests. And on both sides, some of the celibate priests abuse boys. And again, I don't know if that's because they have more access to the boys or that's their preference. But you know, there was the case of the Greek Orthodox bishop who abused the priest's daughter. I mean, I think she was an adult, but she was very young. And you know, it just depends. You know, he had access to her, and he abused her. And her father was kind of unsuccessful in getting. I think he continued as they sort of took him out of the main line of authority, but he remained a bishop, I think, until his death. And you have to wonder how many other victims he had. There was a big article about him in People magazine, of all places, the Black Prince of the Church.
Wow, that's a shame.
If you want to look it up.
I could probably look it up once this is all over. Like I guess this is probably the most important question. I don't recall if I asked it. Like, what specifically needs to change in the Orthodox Church to help put an end to the issue of abuse and cover up?
I think first thing, the people in the pews have to wake up, realize it does happen in their churches, be alert to it. I think they have to be more open with their children. I remember one point in time we were working, I think it was a Roker church, and there were some children that were trying to focus attention on abuse, and they had people, oh, we're not going to tell our children about sex, and it's like you're leaving them unprotected. Some of them, especially the younger kids, if they don't have some idea, and I mean age appropriate, but if they don't have some idea of what they should allow and what they shouldn't, I think the simplest way is say, no one should be touching you other than maybe a doctor, in the parts of your body that are covered by your bathing suit. Very simple. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to prepare your children. And then you have to make sure.
Bless you. Were you sneezing?
No. It's just a stupid COVID cough.
Okay.
Then you have to you have to be willing to call the bishops to account. There was an article that I was reading today about a Catholic bishop. I can't remember where now. Oh, I think Missouri, someplace. And he put a priest who had been accused of abuse, but he had been cleared by the church, put him back into ministry in a parish with a school. And the parents were absolutely appalled, and the bishop came. And the article was kind of interesting because not only were the parents saying, maybe he didn't abuse this child that he was accused of abusing, but you want us to trust our children in this situation, and the parents weren't necessarily willing to do it. And I think that's what needs to happen in the Orthodox parishes too. I know there's one priest that's still, or there's several priests in the Greek Orthodox Church that are still operating that have been accused of abuse. It's like, why do you want that? Why do you want that liability? The Orthodox churches are not as wealthy as the Catholic churches. They're not going to be able to stand billions of dollars worth of settlements. And so they should be more concerned about removing these people. If you think they still have, good for them, put them in a remote monastery. Don't allow any visitors to the monastery and use them that way. But don't put them in parishes with unsuspecting parents and with vulnerable children.
Mm-hmm. Now, wrapping up here, you've mentioned, obviously you only speak English. How was it? And there really isn't any data, unfortunately, about issues of abuse, maybe in countries with larger Orthodox populations like Russia, Serbia, Greece. To your knowledge, has SNAP maybe tried to expand, maybe try to reach, maybe, I don't know, opening up, for example, a Greek website or a Russian website, to reach out to potential survivors there, or try to reach out to organizations with similar missions in those countries?
Not that is, again, because SNAP is an American organization, and we overall have the same problem, that there aren't very many people who speak foreign languages. We do have right now in Europe, SNAP has a leader who speaks French, and we have a leader who is fluent in, I just looked at it not long ago, but she speaks Croatian and some of the Serbian, and there was something else she mentioned, and English. So we have her in that part of the country, but we have to have the people come forward to us. We haven't really had. I mean, when I had my website, there used to be people from Greece who would send me, news articles about things that were going on in Greece. And I would, I have to say, you're going to have to give me a synopsis of it, or you're going to, find something in English on the same topic, because I don't like to put something on the website that I don't really understand. And well, Spanish to English, Google Translate is not too bad. Spanish to English. I found when you put things that are in Russian or Greek, you get some things like, what? What? What is that person trying to say? So we really need people who speak those languages in order to have an effective outreach in those countries. And we don't have that yet. I mean, thankfully, a lot of people speak English, and so there is that are resources, and we try to have them. But SNAP, like our old website, we just don't have the capacity to translate if people don't speak English. SNAP now does have the other thing. It has, of course, Spanish. We have a couple of leaders 3 leaders offhand I can think of offhand that speak Spanish. But even that mission is compromised because a lot of our leaders don't speak Spanish, and we, so we have a special outreach just to the Spanish speakers. Some people, it doesn't matter; they're bilingual; they speak Spanish and English. Other people, particularly some of the newer immigrants, they're not fluent in English. But we do have some for that. Maybe someday we'll have, I think the other big need, at least, is probably from the Philippines or from Vietnam. But, we do what we can when we can. And, as I said, thank goodness a lot of people in the world speak English now.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully, one day, we can see, maybe, an expansion, into, other parts of the world, to address this problem. But this has been an awesome conversation. I truly appreciate it, Melody. Thank you so much for your insight. I truly do appreciate taking the time out of your day for this.
Oh, well, I thank you for doing it. And, when you get the link, let me know, and we'll spread it around.
Yeah, I definitely do plan to share it around. All right, but thank you so much. I had an awesome time talking to you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Have a good rest of your day, and don't get COVID. No.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.